YouTubers, this is another video from your friendly neighborhood reviewer, Evelyn. Today we're going to be reviewing the season finale of Interview with the Vampire, a show produced by AMC and the books based by Anne Rice. To anybody who wants to know what the series is all about and the connection with the books and the film, I recommend you watch my first video. There's the thumbnail here. I've created a playlist. Before we get into the finale, big thank you to any new subscribers and to any new viewers. I really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button. Let's keep the channel growing and leave your comments down below. So before we get more into the finale, what a journey it's been since episode 1 when it got released on my birthday till now episode 7. We've seen part 1 of Interview with the Vampire. To see one's childhood, one's teenagehood put onto the screen in the same feeling and the sentiment as in the books has left me in wonder. From episode 1 when we saw Louis' encounter with Lestat to episode 6 in which now Claudia, their child, which we can say for all reasons are shown in the last couple of episodes, that Claudia and Louis are planning to murder Lestat, and that was left off in episode 6. For the reasons being, Lestat just couldn't leave Claudia to be what she needed to be to find more vampires, and Lestat is supposed undying love for Louis, even though he never really asked what Louis wanted in return. So we open up at the beginning of the episode of Louis talking to Daniel Malloy about their plans of how Claudia and Louis are going to murder Lestat. The big thing that we got off of the cliffhanger of episode 6 when Daniel was dreaming about his first encounter with Louis was he saw Reid in the dream. I pondered, is this a real memory or is this something his subconscious mind coupled together? But I won't reveal that until the end. So we see as Lestat is draining a victim, feeding both Claudia and Louis with the blood of the victim in a whiskey jar. We see more and more of the townsfolk of New Orleans coming to their doorstep leaving offerings. So they managed to get one guy, and this guy apparently had leukemia of the blood, which of course leukemia is a blood disease. They questioned him why they would come to their house. Such a disturbing matter, as Louis had said, but the man said, I come here as an admirer. They say that the devil lives here, but no, I say angel. But Lestat goes and ends the man's life by saying, well, tell that to St. Peter when you meet him at the gates, and bites into his neck and then goes and kills the guy. Lestat goes and identifies the guy who was dying of cancer, as well Claudia reads the letter from the guy saying that he's willing to offer anything as the medicines he's got from the hospital is not working. Lestat comes to the conclusion that all the townspeople are leaving such offerings to their doorstep. It's only a matter of time before these books, Bibles and letters become pitchforks and fires. We can see Lestat is very wise in his years because he's much older than the both of them in that aspect of survival, knowing that it's only a matter of time before the whole town goes to hunt them, because of course the only weakness is the fire and the sun. So Lestat tells Claudia and Louis that they need to leave New Orleans quickly, and he tells Louis and Claudia to get rid of the body of the dead guy and to come to the coffin, which we find funny. Louis tells Daniel that the only advantage that Claudia and Louis had was they was able to talk telepathically about the plan, but Claudia was hesitant to tell Louis the full details of the plan. Throughout the episode, we get put back to the present, and Daniel's still thinking about his dream. He sees Reid, and he's trying to figure out what's Reid's story. And Louis, we can see he's kind of sensing that. Both Louis can read Daniel's mind, so I don't know what's the end game per se. So as we get put back to the past, we see that Claudia, Louis and Lestat are in a train, well, in the rail fair in that time. Claudia and Louis are sitting together while Lestat is sitting on the other side of the row of the train. And Louis tells Claudia, why don't you tell me the plan? And then Claudia says, no, you're too much together with Lestat emotionally. Give yourselves a matter of time and your both heartbeats are beating at the same time. But Louis tries to tell Claudia, I can fake it. And Claudia says, no, you can't. We get progress into the story, and Claudia puts out a plan to Louis saying, we'll have a party. I'll convince Lestat of a party that will be their final ending before moving on. But Louis says, Lestat will never believe that you want just a party without no ulterior motives. But Claudia says, I welcome Lestat, suspecting. As they're at the balcony during the time, they're seeing the street party go about, and Claudia tells Lestat, propositioning him again, because the first time that Claudia propositioned the party is Lestat was talking to Louis as they was hanging up the Christmas tree about which countries they should move to. Louis says Greece, but there's an important Easter egg here. I'm not sure because whoever's read Queen of the Damned, as far as I'm aware, the setting there's around Egypt per se, because to all the Anne Rice book fans, we know about Akasha, known as the first vampire with her husband. When Louis says, let's go to Greece, Lestat says, there's some people that must be kept. And Louis says, what? And Lestat says, don't worry. So that's a big thing that could be potential for more future seasons. But Claudia implants that idea to Lestat about a party, and she uses Louis to avoid suspicion that they're both working together. But Lestat gets in love with the idea of a party, of Mardi Gras, this famous party in New Orleans. I don't know the history about Mardi Gras. I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing this right. It's a street party to end all street parties in New Orleans when everybody dresses up extravagantly. And that will be the setting in which their final feast will come about. So all three of them, Louis, Lestat, and Claudia, convince the mayor that they will give up X amount of money to make Lestat the Raj, or the king of Mardi Gras. The funny scene is when all three of them are together and the mayor says, I don't understand why you're coming to me after 17 years. One, I'm not an organizer of parties, and two, I don't care. And the funny part where Claudia says, we know all the names of the secret society that arranges the Mardi Gras, the Raj, and then the mayor of New Orleans, or this politician guy, takes out a picture and tells Claudia, see this black and white picture, this is 1970, and about your two-tone daddies, which is just, it was a bit funny but not funny at the same time. It's just telling of the times for the obvious reasons. And Claudia just laughs and says, the only difference I see here is you have a funny X on your face, in which we saw in the last episode, in which Lestat gave to the mayor when he hypnotized him. So we get put forward from the party, and Lestat comes in all his regalia, his costume, the theatrics of it all. He's like somewhat of a emperor/king, and he bites into a model doll of a baby, and what meant to be delusion of blood coming out is red kind of strings coming out. And Louis says that this disgusted most of the people within the society, but still quite a lot of people went to the party. As the party ensues, everybody's in disguise with the masks and their costumes, and we see in this party the period piece is more accurate to the book. This is what I say about the clever writing from the showrunners. I hope they keep it for season 2. That mixing the essence of the book from Anne Rice into the stories, that we can feel it makes sense. So as they're looking at the potential victims, Claudia, Louis, and Lestat, they're giving a type of flower to them as to let them know about if they want the power of immortality. Because when they talked to the mayor did say, I'm going to be feeling embarrassed to say this, but what are the terms of your deal, and where do I meet the devil? So both three of the vampires here know that the people of high money wants to know their secrets, because of course it's been almost close to 30 years, while all the citizens of the sector of New Orleans where they are have aged. The three of them haven't. So they use that to their advantage. They give the flowers to their select victims. Louis goes and gives one to the mayor who's there, after he makes such a crude remark about the three of them. And of course, Lestat is there interacting with the citizens. There's a moment before all hell breaks loose in which Lestat and Louis are at the balcony, reminiscing about feelings. Lestat admits that he'll miss New Orleans since the town where they are is made together with the nature. and they both chalk up their soft feelings in that moment to the lack of blood, because all of them decided to fast, not drinking any blood until the party, which made all of them more heightened in their emotions. The part in which we see the book, the film being seen together is Claudia presents to Lestat in the party a set of twins, both male, and tells them, and Claudia kind of gives the intention that this could be perfect as bait. Within the party, Louis hears somebody talking telepathically, and Louis tells Claudia, "Was that you?" And she says no. So that's a mystery there. So as everything progresses, and Louis and Lestat have their last dance, and they kiss openly in front of everybody, and that leaves everybody shocked of the times, because of course at the times, being gay or any sort of other gender identifying was seen as an abomination. We see in that moment that Louis does love Lestat. If Lestat was a different person, he could have given himself all in all. But due to Lestat's ego, Lestat's possessiveness and narcissism, Louis felt, I could see it as a person, Louis felt suffocated that Lestat couldn't see anything else but himself and what his wants and needs. So we get put forward with all the selected people from the party in Louis, Lestat and Claudia's house. The three of them give the people some rubbish story about how the reason that they're staying young because of the Philosopher's Stone, in which anybody who's seen Harry Potter or read other books know the basic notion that the Philosopher's Stone can grant immortality. They give some excuse, but some of the people that are quite drunk, and particularly the mayor, who's looking to be on his last legs, so he tells them to hurry up. So, because they're standing around a large dining table, and there is like, let's say, a punch bowl, the lid on top, and the mayor uncovers the lid and see there's nothing there. As the mayor is calling BS on that, that's when all three of them decide to feast on all the individuals within the property. They go and kill everybody, and Louis horrifically tears out the jaw of one of the individuals, and all three vampires feed on all the people. And when we left with the twins, one twin is dead, and there's the other twin sedated in the seat. And Claudia and Louis then present the twin. Louis got told by Claudia telepathically that she poisoned one of the twins, so that's what he knows. So as Claudia and Louis are presenting this twin, and Louis faking it that they left one for him, Lestat walks closely to the twin and says he looks pretty drunk, and they say yes. Then Lestat says, "Is there something else in this person's body, my love?" And then Louis says no, and then Lestat says, "I wasn't talking to you." And then walks in a mysterious figure in a mask and in a suit, tuxedo. When I saw that, it's very reminiscent from the film when we get encountered with Santino. That scene in the film in which he ends up walking up to the ceiling and meeting with Louis. And when a person unmasks themselves, it turns out to be Antoinette. Lestat finally turned Antoinette into a vampire. And in that moment, Lestat goes and subdues Louis by holding him back, and Antoinette grabs Claudia, and then Lestat says Antoinette was at the ball, and then he tells Louis, "Claudia should have never been made. Look what she's done to the both of us." And then when Antoinette comes in, we find out that Lestat has used Antoinette as a spying tool to find out what Claudia and Louis have been planning. And Antoinette just goes and says the obvious of what she heard, that Claudia was going to poison one of the twins. As Louis is there struggling, Lestat all of a sudden starts vomiting blood, and Lestat gets incapacitated. Claudia takes his chance to stab Antoinette with a fire poke, and then Claudia reveals, "How stupid do you think I am, Lestat? I knew that Antoinette wasn't just at the party, she was following us everywhere." And then we get revealed that Claudia went and poisoned the mayor because she knew, due to Lestat's ego, that when the mayor said, "You want Lestat, him to be the king of Mardi Gras, that Claudia knew that that would have infringed on Lestat's ego, make him angry. So that's why she poisoned the mayor. And in that moment, Lestat is there, incapacitated, vomiting blood, the poison and everything. And then Claudia tells Louis, I'll let you say your goodbyes, and she walks off. Lestat is there struggling in vain, and Louis grabs his cane, that what we've seen from episode 1, that has the sword in there. He gets the sword out and has the sword to Lestat's neck. Then Lestat tells Louis, even though you don't see it, there's this invisible cord that ties between the both of us. Even though I'm at my end, I'm paraphrasing here, I'm glad it was you. And then Louis goes and cuts Lestat's throat, and never-ending blood seems to come out. So we get put forward back to the present, for which we see again Daniel reading Lestat's last words, as when Claudia came back in, she took blood from Lestat's throat that was pouring out and used the quill to write out Lestat's last words, in which he told Louis, for Louis to put him in his coffin, which Reid goes and tells Daniel. And then Louis narrates that there was nothing else that they could do, so they decided to put Lestat's body in a trunk and leave it for the bin men or the rubbish guys to collect. They burned all the evidence and they threw Antoinette into the incinerator, in which she wakes up and she's there screaming as she dies. And then Louis says, Claudia and him, they left Lestat to be driven off by the bin men or the rubbish disposal guys, and they drove to a boat in which Daniel says to Havana, because originally Lestat had booked all their tickets to go to Havana, but Louis says no, a boat in which they bought for the mayor as a bribe to go to the Europe countries, France in particular. And they end the story there. Daniel says, that's all neat and tidy, isn't it? And then Louis tells to Daniel, what do you mean? It's for the inference that Daniel was saying that Louis was giving an inaccurate story. And then Louis goes and says, well, I was haunted by everything that had happened, because Daniel goes and says in Claudia's book, it doesn't give the story of the lifetime of the Great Escape. It was like some pages were torn off or cut off with a ruler. It looked like that Claudia hated you. And then Louis just goes and says about his past trauma. And then he says they were haunted by the murder of Lestat. And Daniel goes and states the obvious. What murder? You gave Lestat mercy. And then Louis is like, well, I gutted him like a pig and watched him bleed. And Louis says, no. You left him to go to the rubbish dump. Where do you think the rubbish dump goes? It doesn't leave things at the middle of nowhere. And then Daniel says, I should know. When I lived with my first wife next to, in New York, next to the dump site, there was rats as big as this. And then Daniel says, there's enough rats in the rubbish site with enough blood in them to revive somebody. And Daniel says these words to Louis. How do you think we know? Because you're the biggest rat eater of them all. And then we see a clip of the luggage that had the locks from the inside open up and a hand appear grabbing a rat. We know that Lestat is still alive and kicking in some form, exactly like transpires within the book. Louis just doesn't want to accept those. Daniel is there pointing to Louis about how he's rewriting the past in his mind. He tells Louis, you went and saved Lestat from some messed up version of what you think love is. And then Reid comes in and says, this session is finished. But Daniel's there walking to Louis, and then Louis walks to the part of their apartment or building or house which has the tree in the middle of a skylight with all these pebbles, a tree with no leaves. Daniel tells Louis, you wanted to save Lestat. Claudia had no issue of burning Lestat. And Louis is trying in vains to deny the truth, and he says, no, that's not the case. Claudia wanted to burn Claudia couldn't burn Lestat. Claudia couldn't burn Lestat. And then we get a flashback that Claudia, from Louis' perspective, told him, we need to burn Lestat to make sure. And Louis lashes out to Claudia, choke holding her from the throat, saying no, not to do it. And then Daniel says, you called me here for a memoir. Well, you don't need a memoir. You need intensive therapy, EDMR. He compares it to war veterans that have seen a companion being blown up. And then we get a flashback of Louis crying over Lestat's body. And then Daniel says crudely, I have nothing else much to live for. My number for being, one of my whoring number is $10 million. I don't speak to my daughters, but I can leave them some money. And then in the background, Rashid's there. We see him blurred out. We see him take off his gloves. We see him take something off from his eyes. And then we see Rashid levitating. And then Daniel says to Louis while realizing, this is the same crap you pulled out of San Francisco, feeding me all this rubbish. And then Louis says, not exactly. And then he says, why? And then Rashid says, I won't save you this time. And then Daniel looks at Rashid, floating. And then Daniel is like, you were there. That Louis tells Daniel, you don't remember, do you? And Daniel says, no. And then Louis says, what did you say about memories being a monster? And then Daniel says the obvious, I saw you in the sun. How come you're in the sun? And then Rashid says, for a 514-year-old vampire, the sun loses its power over us as we age. And then we see Rashid's eyes, these amber gold eyes, and him floating. He takes out a book and puts it on the floor for Daniel to pick up and read. And then we see passages from Paris, and then we see the theater of vampires. And then Louis stands up, he holds Rashid's hand, and he says, I want you to meet Daniel, the love of my life, the vampire Armand. Oh my god! When I saw that, I was like, oh my god, Armand! I knew it. What threw me off was seeing Rashid in the sunlight. People who've still reading these books, because bear in mind, I read all the books from 13 to 16, and after that, I didn't read anymore. But people that are more remembering the books, is this true? Did the power of the sun, gets less for the vampires as they age more? Oh my god! Because I remember, another commenter reminded me of Merrick. I did remember that when Louis tried to kill himself in the sun, it didn't quite take because he was already at this point quite old. So that gave enough of Louis to telepathically tell Lestat to save him in the book Merrick. But in that shot, that moment, we see Daniel, and then his eyes of fear, he was like, oh my god, there's another vampire. And we could see that animosity that Rashid has towards Daniel thinking, I pissed off the wrong person, baby, I pissed off the wrong person. And then we have the ending shot of Daniel looking stunned, and Rashid and Armand holding Louis' hand. They have Armand, and it's actually a higher step, but the end shot, which I put here, it looked like something out of a sculpture. They made both of them timeless. And then the episode ends, and then it says, Interview with the Vampire Part 1. We have season 2 have so much to cover. Louis and Claudia in Paris. And what about Lestat? We know that when I read the book, Lestat was no mention at the last part of the book, apart from the ending part in which Louis goes and finds Lestat hiding in some old crypt in New Orleans. Just hiding away, doesn't want to go into the world. But let's see if Lestat will be brought back for part 2. I think they will, because in these 7 episodes they managed to successfully time jump each 20 years or so. And when Louis and Claudia will meet Armand and the Theater of Vampires, we know part 2 will be the ending of Claudia. That's no big secret. And how this series will move forward. Oh my god, the ending was oh. So that's the essence of episode 7. To anybody who's made it at the end, thank you for sharing this journey with me from episode 1 till 9. Each episode has been the best. Each episode has all the feelings and themes from Anne Rice brought to the TV. I'm excited to see the Mayfair Witches. I will see that when it comes out. As we end the video, leave your thoughts and comments. What did you think about the finale? And what did you think about Lestat at the end? Did you feel sorry for him? Did you feel like he was misunderstood? Do you want Lestat and Louis to get back together? And who's the greater love story? Armand or Lestat with Louis? As I leave you always, stay safe,